So for this video, we're going to be doing a deck spotlight on Redoran Aggro. On my way to Legend this season, I basically played two decks the most, that being Redoran Aggro and Mid Daggeth. I will do a video on Mid Daggeth as well. But I just really wanted to get back to playing proactive decks this season. This is a list that was primarily piloted by CVH last season. He had shared it with me. I really liked it. I made some minor changes to it. For example, he was running Circle Initiate. I'm choosing instead to run Rift Thane. But for the most part, the core of the list is very similar to what CVH was running. And with that in mind, let's actually take a look at the list and kind of talk about some of the card choices, how it functions, and then, like I always do with these, after this we'll showcase a couple of games where I'm piloting the deck so you can kind of get a feel for how it should function. So right out of the gate, early drops are Nord Firebrand and Marked Man. These are really good aggressive 0 and 1 drops because they enable some of the other strategies that you're trying to employ. Specifically, that's cheap 5/5s. This deck runs Siege Catapult. This deck also runs Pit Lion because it turns out playing 5/5s on turns 1, 2, or 3 is really good. But you need to make sure that you can either play them in the case of Pit Lion or attack with them in the case of Siege Catapult. Now, Firebrand, easy way to activate those, right? You can play it for free. Not a wasted card slot in and of itself, because we do also have lots of ways to buff it, whether that's Scimitar, 5th Legion Trainer, or Clan Captain. Even further down, we do have Divine Fervor, like you would imagine. So just a nice, easy addition to help with the catapult strategy. Same thing with Marked Man. The Dream is opening with a Marked Man when you have the ring, and then on the next turn you can pop down the makeshift defenses, ring into Pit Lion, and you've got yourself a massive creature. Marked Man is also a 1 Magicka investment that counts as 2 bodies if you're trying to activate your Siege Catapult for attacking. So again, these guys, while by themselves don't really offer a lot in terms of actual aggression, right? It's a 1/1 in both cases. They activate some of your other strategies very nicely. And then we do run Steel Scimitar because it's just a fantastic aggressive card. It can help you trade up sometimes. It can push 2 extra damage. Not a lot to really talk about there. And then we have a plethora, a cornucopia, if you will, of 2-drops. In fact, if I come down here, you'll see we run 24 2-drops. That is a massive amount, but again, we want a lot of cheap creatures because of Siege Catapult and Pit Lion. Siege Catapult specifically is great because if you can play one early, right, and then on your turn 3 play a 3-drop, and on turn 4 have 2 more 2-drops in hand, or the aforementioned Firebrands or Marked Mans. But if you have 2 2-drops, then you can plop them down in the same lane, activate that Siege Catapult, immediately start getting that early value out of it. So there's a lot of 2-drops. Now, the 2-drops that we run are Ald Valathi Assassin. This is ran for a couple of reasons. One, it helps you chew through larger guards, and it can oftentimes just kind of take field lane by itself against the non-ward creature possessing decks. It's also got Rally, which is really nice because the Rally can get you additional value out of things like Ash Berserker that you might see hanging out down below. And all in all, it's a good, safe 2-drop. We'd have 5th Legion Trainer and or Clan Captain. Again, kind of the same thing, gets us more value out of our Firebrands, out of our little cheap creatures. Does activate Ash Berserker. These are pretty standard in any of your strength and or willpower aggressive lists. Redoran Forerunner is the card that we run to allow us to run Redoran, so it's in there for that reason. But again, just a good value card. The Charge Drain Ward is a fantastic set of keywords, especially in an aggressive mirror. Being able to get a buffed version of this, whether it's buffed from Rally, buffed from our 2-drops, buffed from Steel Scimitar, whatever the case may be, a buffed Forerunner in the aggro mirror can let you trade into something, gain some health, and then a lot of times it's going to gain you pseudo health because a creature is going to have to attack that as opposed to attacking you, so it can really help you win the race. Again, I'm also running Rift Thane. This is a personal choice. I like the flexibility in an aggro mirror. Being able to play a 2/4 guard has sometimes been a lifesaver. That being said, if you want to make this be a Circle Initiate, turns out 4/3s are great. They're even better off of Prophecy, so kind of a personal preference thing. Siege Catapult, kind of talked about it quite a bit already, but just mentioning it's there. And then the last two drops, one is Windkeep Spellsword. This is just because it's one of the better 2-drops in the game. It's resilient, trades very well, works even better when you have decks that run Orc Clan Captain, 5th Legion Trainer, so on and so forth. Being a resilient threat is also important because it stays in the lane, again, hopefully activating your Pit Lions or your Catapults. And then the last one is Vanguard. This is kind of your like pseudo trading card. You don't want to trade often in aggro decks, but if you do, you want it to be something that's expendable, because this gives you a 5/5 back, makes it a little bit more expendable. Again, you got enough buff cards in here that if you need it to not be a 1/1 to win a trade, you should probably have some way to activate that. Having extra charge creatures is always good. This is a card that's really just about giving the deck a little bit of consistency. Alright, so you may have noticed this deck runs a lot of 3-drops. That's also because this is a curve deck. It's an aggressive deck. After you play your 2-drop, you want to be able to play something good on 3. So we've got Undead Clan Sorcerer. This one might look a little bit out of place at first, but the truth is it's a nice stat line. A 4/3 for 3, even if it does nothing for you, isn't terrible. A lot of times if you play this and you can't activate it, your opponents will panic and try to spend more resources than necessary removing it because they fear you getting the blood magic spell. But also because we've got a bunch of weenies, and we do have things like Nord Firebrands, and if you're kind of cheating and looking down further, we have things like Raiding Party and even Markarth Bannerman to feed us a bunch of little guys. Activating this isn't terribly difficult in this deck. I'm not saying you should prioritize it, but it's not hard. So it can be a big boon, especially if you get Drain Life. That's a lot of reach off of this. So this is mostly here because good stat line, can give you reach, or it makes people overcommit to getting rid of it. It does run Crusader's Assault. 2 copies might seem a little weird, but this is a deck that does run Withered Hand Cultist, so you don't want to have too many actions, and there's enough other card draw options in the deck that I feel like 2 is fine. I haven't ever like really been hurting for card draw, or at least not very often, and by the times that I have been like, man, I really wish I had card draw, a lot of times that game was already over with anyway. So 2 Crusader's Assault, 3 Hunting Spirits. Hunting Spirit is arguably one of, if not the best 3-drops in the game. Spending 3 Magicka to likely get a 6/6 worth of stats is fantastic. This deck runs Hlaalu Sharpshooter as its choice of silence, and that's because it does have so many cheap creatures. It's very easy to activate. If you really wanted a guaranteed thing, you could run Earthbone Spinner, but I have not struggled to activate Sharpshooter. Having the 3 health is actually kind of relevant because with 1 Divine Fervor or 1 Rally trigger, it can survive Ice Storm. Pit Lion, again, much like Siege Catapult, kind of already talked about a lot, but 5/5s are good, 5/5s are great, you want to play them, so there it is. Raiding Party. This is a 2 of, much for the same reasons that Crusader's Assault is. It's not that it's a bad card, it's not that it's a card that you don't want. A lot of times playing Raiding Party is a very powerful effect in this deck, but we have so many other good cheap options and so many other good effects that easing back on this, just like easing back on Crusader's Assault, makes sense because we do run 3 copies of Withered Hand Cultist. Cultist is a fine on curve play, but if you have other 3-drops, a lot of times they're the better choice. Withered Hand Cultist is oftentimes best saved for like your turn 5 or sometimes turn 4. It kind of depends on the deck, but you want to play this when you expect a powerful action to be played against you. So playing this the turn before Cast into Time comes online, for example, is sometimes better than just playing it on curve. I'm not saying you can't jam it right on curve, just if you have the choice between like this and Haunting Spirit, sometimes it's not always better to play this first. Specifically in preparation for Ice Storm, that is a fantastic time when you would want to play this. That's why I say sometimes this is best like on turn 5. Playing this, keeping your board safe from an Ice Storm, and then plopping down your Divine Fervor, or even just trying to push as much extra damage as possible. Even if you just delay it for a turn, that's a huge amount of tempo in your favor. Last 3-drop is, of course, Young Mammoth, because turns out in aggressive decks, since all the way back to the closed beta, all the way until now, 4/4s with Breakthrough for 3 Magicka are pretty good. Alright, so on to the 4-drops, and you'll notice we've got a pretty big drop-off after this. We've got Ash Berserker, because it's a card draw machine. Oftentimes it's a must-answer card, and if you've played good 2-drops and good 3-drops, and if you play this and they answer this, hopefully it at least replaced itself when you played it by drawing a card, and you still keep your other creatures on the board. So it's one of those things that extends your pressure while hopefully replacing itself. But yeah, Ash Berserker is, in a strength-based, aggressive, or mid-range deck, it's just a mandatory card at this point. Candle Hearth Brawler. This card is great because it has charge, and that's great for us. But it's like, you know, a mini Hive Defender, and that's really good because it can protect your little bodies. So if you didn't get to play your big 5/5s, playing this to protect the other cards you've already invested in is very helpful. In aggressive mirrors, a lot of times this can trade into something smaller and still leave this as like a, you know, a 2/3 or a 2/2 guard behind, which is good enough in many cases. Just a fantastic card. Then after those two, which are kind of staples, it's just the staple uniques. We have Dawnbreaker, we have Reeve, and we have Black Dragon. Now, I'm currently not running Garnag. If you want to make room for Garnag, I'm not going to stop you. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. I'm just finding that with this deck, because this is an aggro deck, this is not mid-range, this is not mid-grow, this is aggro. By the time Garnag would matter, right? By the time your opponent has 7 or more Magicka, you're hoping to have closed out the game and then some. So it's always just felt like a 4/5 of Breakthrough to me, and so right now he is not in. I don't think that Garnag is as important as Withered Hand Cultist stopping an Ice Storm, for example. So if you want to put it in, great. I'm not going to judge you, but I'm not currently running it. Divine Fervor. So now we're up to the 5 slots. Divine Fervor should be auto include, self-explanatory, you name it. Great for any decks that go wide. This deck does try to go wide. In many ways, this is like a Token Crusader deck that also runs to run Catapults and Haunting Spirits, because those are some of the better cards in the game. And it also wants to run Sower of Revenge. So you would run this in Token Crusader, hence you run it here. It's just great. Doesn't mean you always play it necessarily like right on turn 5. This is a board-dependent play. If you've got a big board, feel free to play it. If it helps you make some trades or take things out of trade range, play it. But if you have a position where you don't have the best board, and at 5 Magicka you could develop a threat or play Fervor, sometimes developing the threat is better. So I do want to point that out. Other 5-drops. This one might surprise some people, but Mark-Earth Bannerman's actually in a really good position in the meta right now. Against other aggressive decks, Lightning Bolt can take it out. Not a lot of aggressive decks, and you'll notice this one is in that same boat, are running hard removal. So it can fall to silence, right? But then you still have a body on the board. If you've already played Divine Fervor, it takes it out of Lightning Bolt range. There's just not a lot of decks that are directly dealing with this right now, and even if it gets to attack one time, it's a huge, huge swing for you. You're basically having paid 5 Magicka for a 6/6 worth of stats at that point, and potentially more when you factor in all of your buff effects, like Fervor, like 5th Legion Trainer, like Orc Clan Captain. Those Nords are fantastic ways to trigger your Undead Clan Sorcerers. I can say personally I've had games where like you stick a Bannerman, and then on the next turn you swing with Bannerman, you trade your Nords into something else, and then you drop 2 Sorcerers, and sometimes that just wins you the game, right? Bannerman's one of those like high risk, high reward cards. But of all of the metas that have existed, this might be the best time to play Bannerman, and I've really been enjoying it. Last 5-drop is, of course, Sower of Revenge. It turns out Sower's still really good. Yeah, it can be eaten by cast into time, but not much you can do in terms of like playing around that. Yes, your opponents can silence it and do all those tricks, but it's a pain to deal with. It a lot of times represents a lot of damage. it's just a good card. Like, if I have to explain slower, I don't know what else to say. All right, so the last 2 slots here are Clockwork Apostle. This could also be like Savage Ogre if you really wanted to do something like that. I like the Apostle because it gives the health as well. So for 1 less attack, instead of getting, you know, a 5-0 that you would get from an Ogre, you get, you know, 4 health, 4 attack, and it's a permanent bonus. It's a permanent buff. This just provides a little bit of extra reach for the decks that would really want it. If it goes really, really late game and you're in like a slugfest with another aggressive deck, sometimes Apostle can swing things in your favor when paired with like Redoran Forerunner, for example. I've actually won an aggro game once this season where I played a 1-1 Redoran Forerunner and my opponent left it alone, and then when turn 7 came around in the aggro mirror, the Apostle buffing the Forerunner basically put the game out of reach for my opponent because gaining 5 health is a big deal in an aggro mirror. So Apostle's just great. We only run 2 of. We don't want them being in our hand often and, you know, making it clunky, things like that. It's just a finisher. And that about sums up the deck. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, hey, why aren't you running this card or that card? It's just because even though it's a 75 card deck, it's still a really hard list to fit everything into. Yeah, I'd love to include cards like Barrow Stalker, Circle Initiate, Morkel Gatekeeper, right? There's a lot of really good aggressive cards, but at some point you have to make some cuts. This is what's been working for me. If you want to experiment, you want to try something different, have at it. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to say this is the definitive way to do it. It's just what's been working for me. So, all right, that's the list. Why don't we go ahead and jump into some games and see how it performs. All right, so we are going first against Archer on our aggressive Redoran deck. And before I got this up and going, I forgot to launch my stat tracker, so we're just going to go ahead and get that launched. But, all right. Here, we want to keep the Siege Catapult. It's one of the best 2-drops that we can start with. But we want other cheap options as well. And we sadly don't find them. In fact, I think our hand probably just got worse.
The Night Mother will guide us.
Not ideal. So we're going to go ahead and get this going. We don't know what kind of archer we're playing against quite yet. Ungolem doesn't really tell us a whole lot. And our hand did not get much better. What we were really hoping for there was a 2-drop, so that we could top deck another 2-drop the following turn, so that we could go 3 into double 2-drops. Unfortunately, we didn't have it. So we're going to play this. This will likely eat something. Probably, alright, a bat. That tells me we're probably up against some sort of control archer. We get lucky there. We actually have something to play. And we're lucky because being archer, this is probably a deck that has a fair amount of options that have lethal.
Shall we put in a dishonest day's work?
So they're going to go with Brynjolf. Probably expecting us to trade in, and let's be honest, it's exactly what we're going to do.
I am death.
And then we're going to go ahead and play a Bannerman over here. So if they have a lethal creature and an Archer's Gambit, that could be pretty bad for us right now, but... we are hoping they do not. I'm going to move this mic here real quick, so I apologize if that sounds weird, but it's in a odd spot where I'm going to bump it. So if the Bannerman gets to swing, with the Nord Firebrands alone, even without playing anything, that would hopefully be enough to activate this, which would be nice because we've essentially generated 0 pressure. The downside, though, is that, yeah, they do in fact have the lethal. Alright, so we could swing with the catapult here if we wanted. The question is whether or not we want to attack them or take the trade. And there's a benefit to both. Keeping the Withered Hand alive is kind of nice in this scenario. And it also means that if they have something like an Archer's Gambit, then they would have to have yet another lethal creature. So as much as I want to push face here, I actually think using our catapult to trade into that is likely the correct play. It's not ideal, but it's not terrible. Again, we're off to a bit of a clunky start, because despite the fact that we run a very, very large number of 2-drops, we're just not finding many. Alright, so that was a pretty good turn for us. Now we have to decide whether we want to go with the Sower Scimitar plan or the Clockwork plan. My instinct tells me it's probably Clockwork. Not only is it a better saturation of our magicka, but being able to respond with Sower based on what they draw feels kind of nice. It also means that next turn we can potentially play both of them. We just have to decide what our best Clockwork target is. And in that regard, it's either this, because then the only thing that will kill that would be like a finish off or a Leaf Lurker, as opposed to like a ping effect, or it's something like one of these two, but I really feel like it's going to be our Black Dragon here.
A dark omen.
So we're going to go ahead and attack. We're also going to put Clockwork in the shadow lane, because if they play something over here that doesn't have charge, we can hopefully block with Sower, right?
So much work yet to do.
I am death.
Alright, so we're gonna bring the heat like so. Again, this thing isn't killed by lethal, so by getting it up to 5 health, we're saying you need like a Leaf Lurker, something in that regard. Now, hopefully our opponent makes a mistake here and doesn't remember Black Dragon doesn't die to lethal. But they're taking their time, so now they're trying to decide, do I want to kill that Withered Hand or not? And the option that they choose is no. So this is, again, where that Sower comes into play very nicely for us. Since we drew that Rift Thane, I think we're going to develop that over the Mammoth, because that allows us to get more damage in this turn.
I've no time for this.
It's a pretty important thing for us. And we're going to go like this.
I will push them back.
Have to assume we're going to lose our Clockwork Apostle to the value trade on the one side. But this gives us a pretty solid board otherwise, because without a silence, this will hit for 5, and so any remaining creature would be enough to threaten lethal. But our opponent has a fistful of cards and 8 magicka, 9 with the ring. So they could potentially clear our board here. I think the best thing we have going for us is the fact that this, again, does not die to lethal. So they have to have a finish off or a Leaf Lurker to properly deal with that. Now they could just throw a guard out in front. That's also pretty effective. So they make the trades as we expected. So it's more expensive because of the Withered Hand, but an Archer's Gambit here would allow them to clear everything but our Black Dragon. So if they had like an Archer's Gambit and then a guard creature, that would pretty adequately buy them a turn. And it does look like that is... Oh, interesting. Yeah.
That was fought well.
Alright, so taking the path that we did, we'll go ahead and say good game. We have lethal. So There you have it. Nice, good, aggressive win against a control deck. And it should keep us within top 50 here. Yep, 42. Let's go play another game. Alright. So, here we are, going first against Telvanni, the boogeyman. And you. Okay. This is not a great opener. Pit Lion is fantastic, but it's much better if we have something that activates it, and we do not. So I'm inclined to throw that back. I'd feel much better about Reeve if we had the ring, so I'm also tempted to throw that back, but it is... against Telvanni, it's arguably one of the better 4-drops that we could ask for. So the question is, how greedy do I want to be here? I think as good as Reeve is, we gotta throw it back. And I'm immediately punished. It's just the way that it goes sometimes. The reasoning I wanted to throw that back was because we were on, like 24 2-drops and, like 20 plus 3-drops. The idea is I didn't want to keep Reeve and then have my mulligan be like this where I didn't have a turn 3 play. I kind of wanted to guarantee we were going to have something on turn 3. So, I mean, we accomplished that by finding the sorcerer, but at the cost of drawing 2 5-drops here. So, 5th Legion Trainer is a fantastic pickup, though. We'll take that. We're going to probably live in the Shadow Lane. Traditionally, you want to take control of field. You want initiative and want to be able to choose your attacks, protect your guys with cards like this. Against Telvanni, you tend to spend a lot more time in the Shadow Lane than normal because of Territorial Viper.
We draw
Right.
power.
We're going to play a sorcerer and pray that they do not have like a reverberating strike. That would be pretty problematic for us. Now there is an argument for this. It could have went field lane, and then when they shackled this could have cleared it and saved it. The downside though is that there are some Telvanni decks that run like Giant Bat. Ew. There's also some that run Mummify. So Mummify, not really what we wanted to see there. But I guess it's not too terrible because that means they're less likely to have a Mummify for our Sower when that comes down. Unless they do something crazy though, we're likely gonna play Bannerman instead.
Shall we put
Because
in
a Bannerman
dishonest stage
into a
where-
Fervor is a pretty fantastic way to play. Alright, so we could play Sower to protect our 2/2. Because it trades and potentially survives against Brynjolf. Or we could continue on our game plan with Bannerman. If they have an answer to Bannerman, however, we're pretty far behind. If they don't have an answer to Bannerman, then Bannerman swings, but we essentially have to spend our Nords finishing this off. So in that case, I think that Sower ends up being the better 5-drop right now.
You should.
Makes me a little sad. I like developing this whenever we can, but this was spooky enough to push us off that game plan. Alright, so they have a negation.
I can smell it.
And a camel. Alright. So there is a Giant Bat and a Lightning Bolt. Those are some cards that we were worried about. Now we could develop Pit Lion here instead of Bannerman if we wanted, which isn't terrible. We could also just play a Battalion instead of the Pit Lion necessarily. We're not playing Fervor, so we're going to go ahead and swing with that. This is an interesting spot to be in here. Again, as much as I would love to get Bannerman going, I feel like just playing the 5/5 might be better. Though they did discard one Lightning Bolt, which tells me they may not have another one for our Bannerman. And if we can get even just one Bannerman up and running, that's a pretty big deal. Alas,
I know a
I think we're
shortcut.
going to play it safe. We're going to saturate our Magicka. This still goes over here because if they don't double clear both, it opens up Pit Lion plus potential draws. Also with the ward, we're not really worried about them charging into this per se. This we're still hiding from Viper.
Death comes to us all.
That is a cursed specter. That is a spooky ghost. Alright, so yeah, Withered Hand is probably good enough here. So we're going to go ahead and play the Withered Hand. Withered Hand is fantastic here because if they did have an Ice Storm, this puts it one Magicka out of reach. They will take this value trade, but we were able to get our Pit Lion down in time. Now it's going to depend on what we draw, but there's also a good chance that we just end up playing Divine Fervor this following turn. Playing Fervor before the Bannerman means that this goes out of Lightning Bolt range.
Are you listening to me? You better be.
Alright, Thorana is interesting. It's taunting me. It really wants me to play a Bannerman, but
Chimera, guide us!
I think we're going to go like this. Having Thorana there is a bit spooky, I'm not going to lie. Can't really remove it, though. I don't feel like getting rid of the camel is good enough right now, either. Alright, they're hitting a prophecy.
If I fall, the hiss will return.
Well, that's a bit of a bummer. That was maybe like worst case scenario, because even Lightning Bolt wouldn't have removed that. Which then also means an Ice Storm would full clear our board this next turn.
A dark omen for you!
Not much we can do about it, sadly. This is a Telvanni deck that runs a little bit more prophecy than I'm used to seeing. Mummify is hit or miss in some lists. This is certainly not something I'm used to seeing.
Where was I? Oh, yes.
So the trade here does tell me that this is going to eat something. Could be a bolt, could be a reverberating strike. Maybe they just Ice Storm and shuffle a bunch of free ones in. Ideally on our next turn, like if we were trying to pick, hey, what's the best draw we could hope for? That makes me feel like that's going to be an Ice Storm. Ash Berserker would be great. Ash Berserker plus Bannerman, both going down, both being able to survive Ice Storms. Ash Berserker drawing me a card. That'd be the best saturation that we could hope for.
Are you listening to me?
Oh, that's
You better be.
really interesting. Alright, so we did not get what we were looking for here. So our options are we can push, we could play this on here for this to trade and then push 6 damage, or we could push 3 damage to develop a Bannerman and then just hope that they don't have an answer to the Bannerman. Because if a Bannerman sticks, that would be 5, 7, 9, 13, like that would represent lethal potentially. So we can either gamble for lethal or set a, you know, if we hit for 6, they're down to 9. They'll probably take trades, and then we could develop 2 bannermen the following turn. It's kind of an interesting decision to make here. It's not cut and dry.
So much work yet to do.
I think we're gonna take the safe route here. By generating a ton of damage, we're basically at this point saying, like, if they Ice Storm, this still survives. That allows us to push potentially 4 damage. The hope is that even if they do have responses here, by going double Bannerman next turn, that they just don't have answers to 2 of them. Lightning Bolt, they'll be out of Lightning Bolt range as long as this is still here. Oh, okay. Amulet is a bit problematic, for obvious reasons. That means that we actually should expect to see potentially a conscription next turn. So like we can get some damage in, but if they do play a conscription next turn,
I've no time for this.
Follow me, man.
we're worried
Follow
about
me,
shackles. We're not going to attack with that because we don't want to break that last rune and give them any more outs.
Man. Now, where was I?
So they take that trade. That's to be expected.
Murder.
All right, maybe it's not a conscription. Interesting. Perhaps they are just going for the victory. Maybe they have the full combo with so few cards in hand. So they are back up to 10. Typically, Necromancer's Amulet isn't played in Nixox, so I'm a little surprised by this. And a Viper and a Mentor's Ring. Okay. So they've got 24 damage, which is not enough to kill us. Which means we should have this pretty handily. Now, I think that their reasoning here is, if they do this and we break this last rune and it's a lightning bolt, then they obviously have the victory, but they're just going to concede. We had the Firebrand plus the Scimitar, so we were fine. Yeah, all right, we beat Telvanni, dodged a bit of a bullet, even with a clunky hand. So, success. Hopefully this helped. Thanks for watching. Until next time, may you walk on warm sands.